Would you stretch a bad decision across 5 decades and call that a win? Because that's exactly what the 50-year mortgage is being sold as. Welcome to season 3 of The Pursuit of Progress. I'm Ben Adams, and in today's episode, Adam and I are breaking down one of the biggest financial traps most people won't even see coming: the 50-year mortgage. Now, it's being marketed as a fix for affordability, but the truth, it's making lifetime debt feel normal. And if we don't talk about what this actually means, we're going to build a generation of homeowners who never truly own anything. This is also part of my American Money 101 series on YouTube, if you want to check it out after this episode, where we challenge the headlines, ask harder questions, and give you the tools to win in any market. Adam, let's go.
What is going on, Ben?
The 50-year mortgage. That is what's going on. How you doing?
Doing great, buddy. Great to have us back in the studio. 26, baby. Been a few weeks. Stoked to get back on here with you.
You still got your Hawaiian tan, I see. You got your Hawaiian shirt on.
A little bit. Trying to
looking great.
Put that out into the universe. So hopefully need to wear this again, hopefully here pretty soon in Hawaii.
Love it. For those that don't know, Adam spent the entire month of November and December out in Kauai, living his best life.
Yep, living it up, man. It's my favorite place on earth, and trying to make it a little more of a regular second home. So hopefully that'll happen if I keep pursuing it and progressing towards that goal. So, Ben,
right.
Before we kind of jump in, I'd love just to hear a little bit more about you too, man. How's your holidays?
Holidays were great. We were down in Tucson, Arizona for Thanksgiving. Got to spend some time with my brother and his family down there. Always a lot of fun to go down there. It's such a oasis for my family and I, and not have a care in the world. Really have that quality family time where we can all be present. The entire family ran a 5K because we're freaks on Thanksgiving morning. We followed that up with a family 5K a couple days before Christmas. But yeah, the biggest thing is just getting a lot of family time in. Spent Christmas here and New Year's here back in Denver. My grandparents are 93 and 94 years old, so every year is just bittersweet that we get to spend with them, and a lot of memories, and praying for health, wealth, and family blessings.
It's great, man. Yeah, you've got some great grandparents, and just a little plug since we're talking about running and also your grandparents. How old were they when they did the was it the Farmers 5000 they ran a couple years, or they walked a couple years ago? But I mean, incredible.
They've done a lot of races, but they set the age record at the Boulder, being the oldest finishers ever in the Boulder, and so that was
ever,
yeah.
Damn,
yeah, and not only won the age group, but Nano was the oldest finisher ever in the history of the Boulder. So if somebody asks you that question, you know the answer.
All right. Well, if I ever am on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Jeopardy, that might come up. So, well, guys, thanks for listening to Ben and I chit-chat about our lives this past couple weeks. We're excited just to see each other and be back at the podcast studio to share some more, hopefully, positive, productive tips to help you guys progress into 2026. And as Ben said, this one's going to be all about the 50-year mortgage, which is getting a lot of news and just publicity recently, especially in the real estate and mortgage world. So we're going to jump into some points, just some talking points that Ben has put together that, as you mentioned a second ago, is also on his YouTube channel, American Money 101. So if you guys aren't familiar with that, definitely also check out his separate channel, American Money 101. He does all kinds of great content with not just mortgage related stuff, but just financial literacy. So give him a follow over there. And I'm just going to jump right into that first point, which is one way to kind of look at it is like affordable is if I can't talk, sorry. Affordable on paper, expensive in reality. So, if stretching debt made people rich, America would already be winning tenfold. Let's talk about what affordable really means, because when lenders say that word, they don't mean the house is cheaper. What they mean, the payment, it fits. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can afford it. So a 50-year mortgage, it really makes it look like the solution is smaller payments, but all it's really doing is pushing that pain so far out that you stop thinking about it. You don't solve affordability. You just instead made the consequences even quieter. So if your plan is to qualify by stretching it to that 50 years instead of 30 without a real exit plan, in our opinion, that is not a win. That is a major red flag. And Ben, I think you're probably starting to see maybe people at least asking you about this on a regular basis. What's kind of your 2 cents? What's your feedback on this?
Yeah, personally, I am always pro having as many tools in the tool belt as possible, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. But I think it's important to have as many lending instruments as possible. So I'm supportive of having this as an option that consumers and homeowners can consider. But what I'm against, and I'm strongly against this, is making the 50-year fixed the norm. And that's kind of how it's being presented and pushed. And I've seen arguments on social media both ways. Some folks saying that, there is a tangible benefit to the consumer. And there is, a little bit of a monthly benefit. We'll go into the numbers here in a minute as well. And then there's some other influencers out there, the Ryan Pinedas of the world, who are really kind of in favor of this. And I don't feel that way. The reason I'm so concerned about this is because when we're normalizing lifetime debt, and we're making that, the American consumer is already strapped and already struggles with so many things when it comes to consumption and normalizing debt. And we just don't need something else that's going to tie up their resources for 50 years. Again, there may be a situation where it is appropriate and someone may want to consider that. So I'm supportive of that, but you really have to have a plan. You don't want to be paying this off, taking 50. I mean, think about that. 50 years? 50
Crazy.
years.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dave Ramsey would probably roll over if he see this really gain a lot of traction.
Yeah, the bank at I work, we're considering offering it, but we are going to require grandchildren to co-sign.
What happens if you're me and don't have any
That's a
kids?
mortgage joke. I'm teasing.
Yeah.
But really, one of the biggest concerns is that interest is the silent tax you are volunteering for when you really consider something like a 50-year mortgage. So let's take a look at what the numbers actually would look like as far as the math and the interest and the amortization. So in this example here, and also keep in mind that typically a 15-year fixed interest rate is going to be lower than what you would have on a 30-year fixed. Makes sense, right? So if the 30-year fixed right now is, let's say it's 6%, usually the 15-year is about a half point lower, 5.5%. Now, we could assume that the 50-year would likely have a higher interest rate than what you would see in the 30-year if it's following that same trend, which it likely would. But in this example, we're going to be keeping the interest rate the same at 7% in both examples, just to really illustrate, even at that, this is like best case scenario here. So let's do the math. A $300,000 loan at 7% interest. Now, on a 30-year fixed, your principal and interest payment is going to come out to $1,996 a month for 30 years. So if you hold the loan for 30 years, the total that you would repay would be $718,000, and the interest out of that 718 would be roughly $418,000. So total repayment $718,000, interest alone would be $418,000. Now on the 50-year, so if we extended that term from 30 years to 50 years, we kept the interest rate the same at 7%, the principal and interest would come down to $1,805 a month. But then here is the silent tax you are volunteering for. The total interest paid would skyrocket. Again, in that first example, the 30-year fixed, $418,000. The 50-year fixed, it would go all the way up to $783,000 just in interest. So your total repayment on the 50-year would be $1,083,000. So you are literally paying $365,000 more over time to save $191 a month. So think about that. You save $191 a month, which sounds great, until you realize that you're paying $365,000 more over time. Let me put it another way. You're saving the price of a dinner out and trading it for the cost of a Lamborghini in interest. The interest doesn't scream, it whispers. And if you don't feel you've paid on your home for 12 years and you still barely own it, and that's another big concern, is that you can be on a 50-year loan, 10, 15, 20 years even, that principal has barely moved because the term is so long. And that is what my concern is I don't think it's appropriate for your average American consumer who's already struggling with affordability and housing, so many different things. And then when you look at just the cost index, uh, this is not how the American consumer is going to get ahead.
So obviously, this is all happening because of affordability. You know, go back in time a few years when we had these, probably never happening again, interest rates in the high twos, low threes. If a 50, only way I ever see this making sense and maybe making sense is if you were back into a very, very, very low interest rate, like a 3%, and you're able to lock it in for a 50-year,
Yeah.
and just turn it into like a rental property or something like that. But I don't know. That seems agree. I 100% agree with you on just that amount of interest is absurd.
Yeah,
And it
and the other
takes
thing
where I'm
is
at.
the payment is always so much less than what people expect and what they're thinking. So when someone is thinking about the 50-year fix, they're thinking, "Oh, my payment's going to be, if the 30-year fix, if my payment's 2,000, it's probably like 1,000 on the 50-year because it's almost double the term." Well, no, that's not the case. Your payment's going to go down not even $200 a month, $191 a month, and for me, it's like that's just not it's not meaningful. I'm gonna go pay for 20
Absolutely.
more years, $365,000 more in interest to get a payment savings of $191 a month. Like, I'm sorry, no thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback off of that and just kind of go a little bit deeper on your comment a few seconds ago about how little actual equity or principal you've paid
Yeah.
on the loan when you have a 50-year versus a 30-year. And, it's kind of like an equity versus illusion principle here,
Mhm.
where equity is control, it's options, it's the ability to sell, refinance, or just make a move, when life changes. A 30-year mortgage that builds that equity steadily, but that 50-year mortgage, it's like, waking up, or excuse me, it's like walking up an escalator that's going the wrong direction. In the early years, you're mostly paying that interest and your balance barely moves, but which
Yeah.
that kind of in turn means that if you try to sell or refinance in a few years, you might not, be totally in a good position. You might be stuck because there's no cushion to cover the fees, maybe the commission for that selling agent when you decide to sell, or really anything else for that matter that, life throws at you. I don't know. In
Mhm.
my opinion, that's not ownership. That's really just a long-term rental with a deed attached to it.
Yeah, I know when you think about it like that, it's like, are you really owning? Because 'Cause you're building such little equity, 99% of your payment the first several years is going towards interest. Do you really own? I mean, I guess technically yes, but I mean, think about it. I liked your analogy about the escalator there. Do you ever go to the airport and you get on one of the walk pads at Denver International Airport to kinda go faster because those concourses are so long? Well, I got 2 teenagers, and we love to do the opposite. So we love to walk against go in the opposite direction on those, and kinda to your analogy, that's what it's like on a 50-year fix as far as building that equity. You're making payment, payment, payment every month, but the equity, unless the market is just, exploding, you're not gonna see those equity gains through the principal pay down like you normally would on a shorter term, and I also think that's the reality. I'm not anticipating personally, professionally, what I'm seeing in the market that we're gonna be seeing these 10, 15, 20% equity growth through market appreciation anytime soon. There was a period of about 5 years where we saw that, and it was crazy. Denver was up over 100, 120%, about a 10-year period from 2012 to 2021. But I don't anticipate those type of returns and gains. And so what that means is that a lot of these gains moving forward are going to become from the debt pay down and slower market gains over the years. And if you're barely hitting that principal and then you do need to sell, like you're mentioning, you're going to have to pay the closing costs, the title fees, commissions to real estate agents. There's not as much there to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just the analogy that I always use is talking about tools in the tool belt. And so, you know, I'm not, as I said, I'm not against the 50-year mortgage, but I am 100% against making it the standard. I think it's great to have as many tools in the tool belt, um, because there are going to be situations where you may need a certain product. That's one thing I love about North Point Bank is that we have so many different products and programs. We have home equity lines of credit, the all-in-one. We have the investor cash flow loan, bank statement loans. And it's great having those options because there are situations where certain customers will need a certain loan product to meet their needs. And so, from that perspective, I'm glad to add this in the tool belt, but we just need to make sure as real estate professionals, especially as originators, that we're really doing right by the folks that we work with. And you have to be so strategic if you are going to consider the 50-year mortgage. It has to be the right situation. And to be blunt, for most people, it's not going to be a tool, it's going to be a trap. And if the only way you're going to qualify is by extending the term to 50 years, you're going to have a conversation with yourself and really ask some of those hard questions. Am I making the right decision? Am I extending myself too far? If you do consider the 50-year fix, do you really want to be diligent as far as making additional principal payments? I believe that's a must. And if you're going to do that, like if you're going to make additional principal payments consistently, then why not just do the 30-year?
Exactly. Yeah, I think the only other thing that sometimes people think about is, I'll just refinance in the future. And, we call this kind of a refinance fantasy for a lot of people because, they always say, don't worry, you'll refinance later on after you've secured the loan. And that's always the pitch, but, that's more of
Yeah.
a hope rather than a mortgage strategy. And you really don't control those future interest rates. They are a little higher right now. They most likely will go down a bit, but you really don't have any control over any of that. And you also don't have any control whether your income is going to grow or maybe if you're going to stay healthy or if your credit's going to stay clean. A
Mhm.
refinance, in my opinion at least, is not guaranteed. It's a bet. And if your entire plan is I'll get out later and that later never comes, well, you're stuck with a debt that's twice as long and twice as punishing.
I know what's that phrase that's been so common in this market the last couple of years? Date
Yeah.
the rate, marry the house. Is that
Yeah.
is that what it
Marry the
was?
home, date the rate.
Yeah. And and to your point there, it's like, oh, you're going to refinance. Well, am I? Like, do you know that I'm going to qualify? My income and my job is going to be the same. My credit score is going to be sufficient. Like, people mention that just as if it's a snapping your fingers. Oh yeah, you're going to refi. Well, is the equity going to be there? Am I gonna be able to actually we don't know any of that. So I agree. I mean, I if and again, if there is a tangible benefit and if you qualify, I think it's something worth considering. But just to say that, you're gonna refi, well, you got to be careful with how you're phrasing that.
Just out of my own curiosity, and sorry to put you on the spot here if you don't know, maybe we can share this with the audience in a comment down below or maybe just on the next episode. But what do you think the percentage of loans get refinanced? Is there any sort of a metric on that, or is that kind of insider knowledge that just each of the different lenders, banks have, but they don't share that collectively with the industry?
Yeah, I was reading some headlines today. Now, up until about a year and a half ago, the vast majority of mortgages out there had an interest rate under 4%, meaning, and that's reflected in our sales volume numbers because people have not been buying and selling. But now that we're several years in, 4 or 5 years later, that number has sharply declined. And so now we're at less than 50% of the mortgages out there have a 4% or less. And so if you are 4%, you're going to want to hold on to that if you can. When I see people refinancing, um, a lot of times I want to make sure that they're doing the right thing for their short term, but more importantly, their long term financial vision. Because if you're someone that has a 2.5% interest rate, and maybe life happened, maybe the credit card bills got racked up and you have some debt, you want to consolidate that. My suggestion is for folks to not disrupt those loan terms, especially if they have equity, because there's going to be other ways to consolidate some of that debt. And if a refinance makes sense, if someone does have a 7.5% and they can get a 6, that's something that you're going to want to consider. How I always look at that is I want the folks that I work with. I'm very big on financial planning and having a financial vision. How long are you going to be in the house? How long do you anticipate being in this loan? Do you have any other goals? Are we planning for anything else in the future? Are kids going to college? Are there going to be any other big expenses? Let's make sure that we're considering that because we want to make sure that if we're going to incur the costs of going through this refinance, that there really is a tangible benefit now, but then it's not going to disrupt any of those long-term financial plans that you have.
I love that. Great.
Yeah. And as I was saying, I mentioned this earlier, but lifetime debt just cannot be the standard. And I think for a lot of middle class Americans, it already is. And so when the 50-year mortgage becomes normal, lifetime debt becomes normal. And if lifetime debt is already normal, then this becomes a debt sentence, not a death sentence, a debt sentence. You're no longer on your path to ownership. You're building a society where owning the home outright is a luxury only a few will ever reach. And if 50 becomes normal, so if 50 years become normal, what's next? Well, why not 60? Why not 70? Have you thought about that? Hey, that was my joke earlier. I'm going to have my grandkids co-sign, pass the mortgage on to my grandkids. So we're not just, and this is ultimately what it comes down to. We're not just stretching the mortgage, we're stretching the consequences.
I want to ask a question again, just personal curiosity here, but all right, let's just say, a 20-year-old, let's say there's two people that have an identical income, identical level of debt at the moment. They're both, applying for a loan to buy a house. One
hmm
person is 20 years old and the other one is 60. If there's a good chance that that 60-year-old might not even make it for a typical 30-year mortgage, you know what I mean? Like, is there some sort of a kind of a little morbid here, but is there some calculation that goes into the pre-approval process, or just some of this back end stuff that I'm sure some of that probably is fair housing, or just a little bit against the rules? But I don't know. I'm just kind of curious if there's something about that you could share with us.
Like a death clause or,
Yeah, because the 50 year, just it seems like that, like anybody that's over 30 years old or 28 years old, let's just say it's 78 is the average age for people dying.
yeah.
At 28 years old, after that, you're more likely than not going to be able to complete that 50-year payment, 50-year loan.
I mean, consider this. The average first-time home buyer is roughly 40 years old. The average life expectancy, I think this is what you're getting at. The average life expectancy for a male in America is 72 and 78 for a female. So if we're using what the averages are, average first-time home buyer, average life expectancy for male or female, they're not going to come anywhere near being able to pay this mortgage off. But you're right, though. It comes down to fair housing. You can't discriminate based off of age, sex, and all of the other things that are important there. And so regardless, someone could be 90 years old and still apply for a 50-year loan. Now, there are going to be equity requirements, loan to value ratio requirements, both for conventional FHA. And ultimately, you do want to be aware of that and making sure that your heirs just as part of your estate planning. Like me, for example, like I have all that planned out. I have an estate plan for myself, my home, my mortgage, my investment properties, the debt on that. I know exactly how it's going to get paid for. I don't want to, pass on all this debt to my heirs. I want to make sure that there's a plan in place to where they're not going to be responsible or scrambling trying to figure out ways to deal with what's going to be coming down the pipe. So I'm very big on financial planning, and again, just that vision. I think most people need to really think about that and just be aware. But if somebody's 50 years old, 50-year mortgage, if they're sick, I mean, I'm living to 140. So I've said that before in this podcast. So I'll see you at 140.
All right. Well, let's just kind of break it down, the final verdict here. 30-year fixed, still probably the best standard for most people. It offers that solid blend of payment, equity, and flexibility. That 50-year fixed, though, this new option that might be coming out here, it's a tool. It's a niche option for very few people, potentially. It's a strategy that really only works if you're disciplined, you're really well informed, and you're not relying on any form of luck. So if you're using a 50-year to buy more house than you can actually afford, you're definitely not winning. You're really just delaying that pain. So
Yeah. When you look at the payment, 50-year versus 30-year. And so, yeah, I broke down some data here comparing the 30-year to the 50-year. So when it comes to monthly payment, the 50-year does win slightly. When it comes to interest paid over the term of the loan, 30-year wins by a landslide. When it comes to building equity, the 30-year wins. When it comes to flexibility, the 30-year wins. When it comes to risk resilience, the 30-year wins. So literally the only category the 50-year wins at is payment. And it's just slightly more favorable, not meaningful, not life-changing, just slightly more favorable. And the 30-year still dominates in all these other categories. So again, it's okay to consider a 50-year. It may be appropriate in certain situations, but you don't want that to be the standard. The 30-year for most people really is going to be the best option.
yeah, like use it right or just do not use it at all. If you do take that 50-year mortgage, in my opinion, a few ways is still asking for that side-by-side comparison, just like you did at the beginning of this episode, really showing on paper the difference, real numbers, not just the payment, everything that encompasses each of these two loan options. And then also just making those extra principal payments like you're on a 30-year schedule. So even if you're on a 50-year, still treat it like a 30-year. That way you're getting more of that principal paid earlier on. You're just in a much better position with a little bit less of that crazy amount of interest payments. And then also set some trigger points. So if rates drop to, X, let's just say 5%, or maybe your income grows to a certain level, at those certain places, then refinance or pay down, but only in those circumstances. So really just treat the 50-year, really like a bridge, not a home.
Yeah, and I think another thing is that we have to really consider that when it comes to mortgage, it's not just a loan, it really is a life strategy, and all mortgages are tools, and most people don't think of them like that, though. They think of it as just a loan, something they gotta make payments on, but when you have a really strong financial plan, you are thinking about mortgage as a tool, a vehicle to build your net worth, to build wealth, to create other opportunities for you, and that's really what I want to leave you with right now because your mortgage affects everything. It affects your stress, your savings, your options, your ability to build wealth. So don't make a lifetime decision just to get a slightly lower monthly payment and ask yourself what it costs long term, not just what it feels like today. Because comfort today can cost you decades tomorrow.
Absolutely, guys. If this episode hit home, maybe share with someone that's thinking also about refinancing or financing a home. Into the hype doesn't build freedom, clarity does. And hopefully, on this episode, you got a little bit more clarity on the differences between these two options, especially coming from Ben, the expert when it comes to mortgage and loan. Everything about those two things, and as well as many others. Once more, guys, don't forget, if you haven't yet, check out Ben's second channel on YouTube, the American Money 101 channel. But for today, this is The Pursuit of Progress. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Love you guys.